Tell us about some of the experiences you have had with large property disasters during your time as a regional facility director.
I would say our largest damage to a property was at our independent living facility. It had to do with water. We had a broken sprinkler pipe, and it took out approximately 6 resident apartments.
Earthquakes, of floods, of fires, of loss of life on our property.
My most recent experience was in February of this year at a 60-unit elderly community which experienced significant water damage due to a frozen pipe.
Severe tornado damage in Western Mass in 2011. We've also had extensive fire damage in New Hampshire several times, and of course the routine water damage, flood damage, etc.
In the situation at the high school, we had a 3/4 inch copper pipe that froze and burst. It was an exterior hose bib that was supposed to be frost-free, and it wasn't.
Our most profound and biggest learning experience came in October 2011 when we lost power on campus for the first time in recorded history.
Fires at a property, floods, unfortunately, but every manager or property owner will encounter similar situations over time.
Minor fires, there have been ice damming, and most prevalent have been the water pipe bursting.
The one disaster that comes to mind in particular is a common boiler fire that was so significant it displaced the entire building consisting of 50 units.
What we learned from these experiences was we were more than prepared to move our residents away from their units into safe areas and be prepared to sort of take that next step.
What I would do differently is I would definitely make sure that all work locations are inspected after a vendor leaves the property to ensure that all insulation is properly restored. Make sure that all systems the low points in systems are drained to make sure there's no residual water left. And also check on all the systems to make sure that they're restored to its original condition.
So the best you can do is be prepared for those disasters and have a plan that really minimizes any business disruption to the organization or our tenant base.
Educating the residents is a key factor in trying to get this building restored as quickly as possible.
We were very glad to have established an early relationship with a restoration company that could come out and assist us. With some new staff, we want to make sure that they know the location of the building, water shutoffs, and so forth. And that has to happen quickly. That's always not the first thing you think of when you take over ownership or management of a building, but it is very important with all the other demands of a property manager.
We would plan more, we would communicate more, and we'd practice. We'd practice that plan.
You have to be prepared ahead of time. You can't go into a disaster and expect to recover from it. You have to have a plan ahead of time. You have to have vendors in place ahead of time that are going to be there to back you up, because no matter how good you are, if you don't have the backup of your vendors, you're never going to succeed.
What would you say are the 3 most important practices in order to minimize property damage and prepare for a loss? How have you been able to sustain these procedures?
Drills, documentation, and building knowledge.
Scenario training through establishing key vendor relationships with your restoration company, your roofing company, your plumbers, your electricians. If you have those relationships established in advance of a disaster, when the disaster happens, those people are going to be there to back you up and give you priority service.
What's very key is to have the response team in place, and everybody needs to know their roles and responsibilities specifically, and ensure that you have a backup in place if the senior property manager is on vacation, who is going to take that role. And not just with the building management, the tenants need to know as well.
Well, I think it's key to make sure that you have a good preventive maintenance policy in place. You have contractors who come in to inspect systems, i.e. your sprinkler systems, your fire alarm systems are tested and make sure that those are working properly. Also, we provide training to staff as well as residents on what to do in any event of an emergency. And making sure that all your resources, for example, your emergency call system, making sure that they have the proper numbers.
I think being prepared I think constantly reevaluating your current situation, and anticipate sort of the unexpected.
You need to be prioritize that your staff is continually educated on what to do. In case of an emergency, you need to have a procedure on what's going to transpire, whether you're going to relocate your staff, whether they're going to come in and pitch in to help clean the mess out. You need to know what vendors you're going to call in to give you assistance, and continually talk to them on a yearly basis, on a frequent basis.
Run tabletop simulations. We recently did one of our larger properties. It's a 3-hour plus review of various scenarios. All our stakeholders and major key vendors, from the sprinkler company to our restoration company to the building management, were involved, and it was the operations directors as well as the senior regional management of all the vendors, where we went through certain emergency scenarios and how we would react to them, and you find out where there are any holes in preparedness for that.
Planning, preparation, and training. Having a relationship with a company that you can count on, that you know will be there. Letting your staff know what to do when you know there's a storm coming, there's extreme cold weather coming. Monitoring the buildings over the weekend when necessary.
I would say the 3 most important things we can do are plan, plan, and plan. But obviously planning is the most crucial part of any exercise when you consider business continuity. Essentially what we do here at Wesleyan is we plan, we write checklists, but the most important thing we do is assign responsibility. It's very easy for a plan that's written and put on the shelf to become non-existent, to not be referenced and not be useful in the time of emergency. The most important thing we do is we develop a plan, we assign responsibility, and then we practice that plan. We take the plan off the shelf, we dust it off quarterly, yearly, whenever we see a storm coming, and we assign responsibility, and we actually practice.
Drills, drills, drills. Run drills, practice, re-practice, and run through the processes again and again and again. Proper documentation, making sure that all the information is current within your program. You have contact numbers, you have folks, you have organizations that are reached out to and needed to be contacted and coordinated with. All that information must be current. It's hard to do, and with multiple properties in a portfolio, but at the end of the day, it's the most important thing, is having all that contact information available and current. If it's not current, it's useless. Understanding of the buildings. I find this is often overlooked, where in the program or in the process, we have, I'll use a simple example of a valve that needs to be shut off. If a caregiver or somebody in that capacity is unknowledgeable or even hesitant to turn a valve when you're calling over the phone to get them to just move the valve over, it's useless. You need to run the practice drills. You need to physically have them exercise all aspects of the program.
Something that's gone unsaid also that a lot of folks don't do is they develop strategic alliances with local businesses. That might be an excavator, in our case, to help us remove snow, or a local site contractor to help us remove water, for example, even the fire department, local city, state agencies. All of these folks are a wealth of information, and those strategic alliances are extremely important when you have an emergency, a large-scale emergency. So the city of Middletown, the state of Connecticut, even the federal government have alliances with us. We have alliances with them to have mutual aid in the event of a large-scale emergency, and we practice those. In fact, one of our buildings at Wesleyan is a FEMA distribution site. So we have a large-scale drill every year with the federal and state government and local government to help us understand how we would react in the event of a large-scale catastrophe.
Tell us about your disaster plan. Is there a way your property managers and maintenance team practice disaster planning? How successful has it been during implementation?
We have an app that all of our property managers and maintenance supervisors have available to them on their smartphones, their tablets, or their computers. It runs through scenarios anywhere from active shooter to flood to hurricane to tornado to fire to death, and we routinely run through these scenarios with our staffs, and they have at their fingertips a list of how we want them to respond in these events, and they're very good at essentially following the checklist.
Know your neighborhood and, define that. Know the building, because the building next door can create a huge problem for you if they have an issue. So sometimes people are, don't be stuck at your desk. You've got to get out, you've got to know the civil authorities, get to know the fire department, get to know the police that's going to come to your building. If it's a generator company, if power goes out, make sure you know the people at the generator company and you get the call.
We work with our local fire department to come in and give training to our residents on what to do in the event of a fire, where they should go. We also reach out to our local Red Cross and other agencies like that to, who may provide shelter in the event that there's a power outage or there's a snow emergency. We also listen to the local state agencies who announce whether there's going to be impending bad weather so that we can prepare for that.
Our disaster plan and evacuation plan, which is somewhat of a dual document, is approximately 100 pages and runs through the whole gamut of from everything from resident safety, getting them confined, all the way through until having the building secure, stable, and running forward.
We conduct tabletop exercises fairly regularly, and it brings the different disciplines together to really see how they would interact, how one group would respond, which may be surprising and counterintuitive to another group. So to see the different disciplines within our organization communicate in anticipation of that, I think really allows for a more efficient response when a disaster does occur.
I think one of the things we do is we keep learning. Every day we keep learning. But we're also much more in tune with an emergency. A good example, we have these hurricanes rolling up the coast. What we'll do is we'll prepare a week or 2 weeks ahead of time. We'll make sandbags, we'll deploy sandbags. We'll send out large-scale communications throughout the community. I think that our planning for catastrophes, our planning for large-scale events has become almost continuous. And I think that continuous planning keeps us all fresh, keeps our equipment fresh, and makes sure we're ready in the event of a disaster.
Well, we have a priority service agreement. What that says is that when we have an emergency that we can't handle with our own staff, we know that we have ARS that we can call, and we will get the service we need immediately to deal with these problems, whether it be a roof leak or a pipe burst or any other issue, primarily water leakage that's going to lead to a disaster that frankly we can't handle on our own.
A disaster plan, in my mind, should be one where, number one, your in-house staff is very aware of what that procedure would be. So it's something that's been pre-planned, it's been written out, it is discussed at least on a biannual basis.
And I think one of the most important things for our managers to understand is the buildings, its mechanicals, and its operation. Again, because Connecticut Real Estate Management doesn't employ direct maintenance staff, it's paramount that our managers understand those building operations and those mechanicals. After each disaster, we sit down and we say, what did we do right and what did we do wrong? And there's always room for improvement. So to continue to evaluate these plans and take recommendations from vendors, from other customers, from clients, is very important to us.
How about education for your staff? Can you make some recommendations on the best educational training that have had a positive impact on your company?
Whenever there's an incident, to get together as soon as possible after that incident and reevaluate everybody's actions. What did we do right as an organization? What did we do wrong as an organization? Where could we really have improved the process? It allows people to sort of see the incident from different angles, and I think it makes it a more educational experience. So unfortunately, experience is the best teacher, and I think this holds true in this case as well.
There is certainly a lot of training webinars that are done today. That group can sit down around in a conference room and gain education of new means and methods. Again, going back to preventative maintenance, where if you see something, say something so that it can be addressed, and if not immediately, at least it's put on a list and it's prioritized and the financial entities of any corporation or facility can take and evaluate what risk they'd like to take in addressing certain situations.
Well, yes. Well, we've had OSHA training provided, and that was really important because it taught us a lot about storing chemicals that could be flammable, i.e. paint. People don't realize how flammable paint is, and paint thinners, and then there's other cleaning products that may have some flammable agents in it. We've also labeled those products and keep them in a fireproof cabinet. We've also had Homeland Security do some training, provide us with some training, what to do in the event of an active shooter. And that training is currently being rolled out to all of the site staff. We've only had just a few of the site staff who participated in the training, as well as the regional staff. And we're now rolling it out to our additional properties.
Education is key to our business. We like to have our people participate in education that's not only sitting behind a desk or watching a video. I feel that any education where hands-on training is involved is key. It gives our people the chance to see what happens and the steps that need to be taken to see a disaster through. As far as specific training, we avail ourselves of all available training.
I would suggest that the best education, I think, is planning together, is thinking, is using your head around your own facility to understand where you're vulnerable, and to imagine. I think a good imagination is about the best thing we could have in the event of a disaster. It could be heavy snow, it could be heavy rain, it could be heavy wind, it could be a combination. So all of these things, I think, are something that we should continuously plan for. We send our folks to FEMA training yearly. In fact, I attend FEMA training yearly, and I think it's very useful, particularly when it comes to coordination and communication. But it is really hard to be sitting down as a team, taking out a piece of paper, assigning responsibility, and understanding how you're going to react in the event of an emergency. And again, use your imagination, because every emergency looks so differently. And communication is something that we need to talk about. In today's age, it's about communicating and understanding what the situation is in the event of an emergency. I think back to 2011, cell phone towers were down. Email didn't work, text didn't work. It was very difficult to communicate. So we've actually developed communication protocols that will withstand any sort of outage and help us then weather a disaster.
We're actively involved in organizations such as BOMA, Building Owners and Managers Association. Preparedness classes really are not difficult to find if you want to look. I know BOMA offers classes both locally and at the regional level on active shooter, on disaster preparedness for floods, water, just how do you react to that? And it's not just the speakers or the experts in those areas who are providing insight. You really learn a lot from the other attendees in the class, because nobody's encountered every scenario in their career. This way, when you're in a group and everybody can share their experiences, we all learn.
Well, there's various trainings that we've participated in through FEMA, through the Red Cross, through CAI, through varied insurance vendors, but there could always be more education available to us out there. I think one of the things that's most difficult for us is that there's disasters that you can properly plan for, and that there's disasters that you really can't plan for. In particular, when Superstorm Sandy hit, we had some idea of what the implications of that storm were going to be. So we were able to somewhat prepare for that. Maybe not to the magnitude of what actually happened during that storm. We have some coastal property down in Bridgeport, 250 some odd unit complex in particular, and every single unit sustained damage down there. So learning and education and how we can better handle those types of situations is really important part of how a management company is going to be successful in continuing to try to help associations recover from these disasters.
The one that comes to mind is what customers should do while they're waiting for ARS to arrive. And we found that particularly helpful for the custodians who tend to be in the building when there's a disaster. And it tells them that, you know, there are things they can do within their scope of work to mitigate or minimize the damage from whatever the disaster might be, whether it's a sprinkler leak or another some type of pipe leak. So what they can do is they can shut off the utilities, they can cordon off the area to minimize the spillage. They can get equipment such as squeegees and wet vacs and start getting air movers going. They can do the proper notifications. They've been trained on mold, so they know the areas that are more subject to mold than others. So just giving our staff this information is a significant benefit to the town and to our staff. So that's really what comes to mind as the most significant training we've had in this area.